Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about Astile Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command. Astile Sector's major world is Nth, which is insane because Nth is a planet whose moon gets pulled so close every 8 years that the atmosphere of the planet and the atmosphere of the moon intersect. That means the surface of the two bodies is maybe 100 miles apart. That's nuts. I have no idea how the moon escapes the planet's gravity well after that. You'd think they'd collide. Even without a full-on moon collision, the tidal effects are devastating. The whole planet basically gets wiped out every 8 years, and despite the regularity of the occurrence, there's not a whole lot of things more predictable than orbital mechanics, people still end up getting left behind and pulverized every time it happens. They get left behind because no structure known to sentient life can stand up to these natural disasters, so everyone sets up giant refugee camps and space stations while waiting for it all to blow over, and then they go back down and rebuild. There's got to be something insanely valuable down there to justify why they keep doing this, but I can't find any record of what it might be, so my working theory is that it's a particularly rare shade of blue milk. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Bajic sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. Every now and then, you'll find a planet whose late Republic data file made it through the purge of the Imperial bureaucracy completely intact. Cabeira is a planet in the Bajic sector that is covered in ocean, but with over 2 million volcanic islands. Several in the southern hemisphere are currently active. The population is roughly 8 million, split primarily between humans and Twi'lek. It's a pretty typical minor world. The only thing interesting about it is that we have such detailed information on such an unimportant world. The galaxy has an actual literal million planets like this, and the vast majority of them were pretty much completely lost during the purge of the bureaucracy. We don't even know their names half the time. But I can tell you the annual rainfall of Cabeira for some reason. What Bajic Sector is actually relevant for is being the primary base of the Tenlos Coalition. The Tenlos Coalition is a criminal organization that was effectively a vassal of the Black Sun, regionally relevant to 15th Hook Nebula and especially dominant in Bajic Sector, but pretty much non-existent outside that area. They did your usual spice running and extortion racketeering, and that's where most of their income came from, but they also made a decent pot of gold on contract kidnapping. They operated the shipyards at the Vergesso asteroids, which was the site of a few minor space battles between the rebels and the Empire. You might have heard of them. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Bon Niu Look sector in the 15th Hook Nebula Command. 15th Hook Nebula is kind of a desolate oversector, and this sector is no exception to that general rule, presumably because of how hard that name is to pronounce. The closest thing to a major world here is Charlicia, which has a few 100 million people on it. That's not puny or anything, but it's an order of magnitude smaller than Naboo, which is kind of embarrassing for a sector capital. There's more famous planets in the sector, though. Verdanth is a jungle world with a few tens of millions of people living on it. That's about the same size as Tatooine, which is locally famous for how many times it got conquered and reconquered by Sith Lords during the Dark Age. This is the very end of the new Sith Wars, which are at the very end of the Old Republic era, when the Republic had completely disintegrated and continued only as a loose alliance of everyone opposed to the latest incarnation of the Sith Empire, which was itself fractious and perpetually divided by infighting between different Sith Lords. Conqueror of Verdanth almost became a joke of a title because of how many times the planet changed hands between different Sith Lords in this era. This sector also had a couple of rebel bases. You're probably most familiar with Crate, which got repurposed by the Resistance for all of 45 minutes after the First Order kicked them back into space. Less well known is Arbra, where Rebel Command briefly relocated after losing Hoth. According to legend, Arbra was colonized in the pre-Republic era by the Sith species. We're really far from Sith space, so this seems very unlikely. Why did they cross the entire galaxy to colonize this planet in particular, while ignoring all the other perfectly good planets along the way? If it was a Sith colony, I think it was almost certainly during the Dark Age at the end of the Old Republic era, when a lot of sectors in this region of space were conquered by fragments of the unraveling Sith Empire. Whoever the Arbran colonists really were, the legends say they could split themselves into light and dark halves, and they could have killed their evil shadow selves, but they viewed that as self-destructive, so instead they would imprison them behind force fields. That seems about as far-fetched as the Sith colonist thing, but at least it's a cool, insane rumor. An ancient underground city long since abandoned by its creators, leaving behind only the prison in the furthest depths, where they kept the physical manifestation of all their fear, anger, and hatred locked away for eternity. Woo! Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Catavine Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command. The planet of Melita/Dawn was split by a civil war so intense that the two factions couldn't even agree on what to call the planet. Obi-Wan Kenobi briefly left the Jedi Order to join a peace movement on this planet. I guess when your Jedi Master is Qui-Gon Jinn, not only is renouncing the Jedi Order for a couple of weeks allowed, it probably gets you bonus points. This sector also has a couple of mildly important CIS holdings. Eos was a molten mining planet with a droid foundry that supplied the Trade Federation, and Gaul was a supplier of parts for Rothana Heavy Engineering. They went SEP, which necessitated a rapid Republic counterattack to keep the ATTEs flowing to the front lines. Eos is an interesting case. It's allegedly a droid foundry run directly by the Trade Federation, but the Techno Union was mostly in charge of droid production, so that's odd. The droid foundry there was destroyed just before the invasion of Naboo by the mercenary Vanna Sage, who had been working for the Trade Federation up until they double-crossed her. She teamed up with an assortment of other foes of the Trade Feds to wreak some havoc on them while they were otherwise occupied with the blockade and invasion. From the way the stories tell it, you'd think her initial raid on the Foundry was literally just her and a snub fighter, and that her later return, when she razed the whole facility, was only 3 pilots total. I think it's possible that when these stories say things like Vanna Sage destroyed the deflector shields and escaped the planet, and later returned with the pirate Nim and the Royal Naboo pilot Rice Dallows to destroy the facility, they probably don't mean literally just the 3 of them. Like, there were other pirates and mercenaries involved, although Rice Dallows probably was the only Naboo pilot present just because it's weirder to refer to a formal organization like the Royal Naboo Starfighters by the name of their leader, the way you might with pirate crews or mercenary companies. In any case, that's all me speculating, and you definitely wouldn't know to look at this footage. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Core Rick sector. Core Rick sector is the domain of the Geodu species, these weird cone-headed guys, and they either don't mind crime lords or they're just really bad at keeping them out, because what few notable planets this sector has are notable mainly for being havens for crime lords. Most notably, this is where Black Nebula, a Black Sun offshoot, tried to establish itself. According to the rumors, Mara Jade took out their leader on behalf of the Empire somewhere between Endor and Jakku. Mara Jade is totally unconfirmed, and it's unlikely that a de facto Sith of that power would remain unconfirmed this long after the time when she was allegedly active. Which is too bad for the Core Rick sector, because Mara Jade smacking the Black Nebula down before it could get off the ground is the only time anything interesting has ever happened in the whole sector. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Dale sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command. Dale sector had a lot of front operations for the Tenlos Coalition, a criminal organization based out of the nearby Bajik sector, and none of those front operations were even slightly interesting. Tenlos is a big deal out in 15th Hook Nebula, and I keep trying to find some kind of story to tell about them, and it's just not here. Somehow they have managed to forge a criminal empire throughout the better part of this oversector without a single interesting rumor about them making its way onto the holonet. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Grumani sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. At the very end of the Old Republic era was a period of conflict spanning centuries called the New Sith Wars. While the entire Old Republic era was defined by the conflict between the Republic and the Sith Empire, the New Sith Wars were an era of continuous conflict, so intense and relentless that the final century of it saw the Republic and the Empire both effectively disintegrate. They persisted as a loose alliance. A Republic sector was much more likely to ally with another Republic sector against the Sith sector than vice versa, but individual sectors and sometimes even individual planets were basically left to fend for themselves. Communication, already fraught in a pre-HoloNet era, broke down completely. During this dark age, a Sith Lord took over Grumani sector and decreed it to be the Chagras hegemony. This was a big deal for this region of space because Grumani sector is easily the most densely populated sector in this region of space. While none of the individual planets here are as famous as nearby Iriadu or Naboo, the sheer number of also-ran C-tier planets adds up to a lot. For example, the agri-world Chaloa was ruled by the Daemonate. The Daemonate was the personal domain of Sith Lord Daemon. Domain? however you pronounce that. One of the successor states of the Chagras hegemony that had captured the entirety of Grumani sector was this Daemonate, and after Chagras's death, it was split a half dozen ways between various Sith lieutenants, especially Daemon and Odion, Chagras's two sons. The Daemonate discovered Chaloa had a large supply of beradium, an explosive used for the manufacturing of, most famously, thermal detonators, and most importantly, artillery rounds. Nothing eats up artillery rounds like a full-scale war, and the Daemonate was fighting other Chagras successor states like the Odionate. The Chaloa Resistance, another pro-Republic faction, got word out to the Jedi Master Vanar Treese, one of Grumani sector's Knights Errant, Jedi heroes who wandered the sector, fighting the Sith forces there for the decades of chaos following the establishment and subsequent disintegration of the Chagras hegemony. Vanar Treese rallied the resistance and disrupted the extraction. The Sith forces of the Odionate invaded the world to try and secure the resource for themselves, and Sith Lord Daemon rigged the mines to detonate, ruining the entire planet and wiping out a considerable chunk of Odionate forces. Odion countered with a covert bombing attack on Daemon's capital world of Darknell, which convinced Daemon to keep pushing on the weakened Odion in hopes of finishing his brother off. This led to a deal between Daemon and the Quarian Sith Lord Bactra that took place on planet Gazari, only to be interrupted by Odion, who was hoping to destroy the Alliance before it could properly mass its forces. During the battle, Daemon and Odion's mother convinced them to unite against Bactra and keep the sector in the family. Bactra's entire army was wiped out by the betrayal. He retreated to his capital planet of Jutrind, and Odion pursued him there and finished him off. The entire Bactranate was sliced up between the other Sith Lords of the sector. Aquilars Minor was an ocean planet ruled by the Daemonate. Grace Command, a Republic-aligned force originally from Alderaan, started running deluge spice to Aquilars to destabilize the planet and weaken the Daemonate. Hutt forces tried to take advantage and capture Aquilars for themselves, resulting in a three-way battle between Grace Command, Zodo the Hutt, and the Daemonate, during which Zodo deployed storm divers, capital ships specially equipped to cause tidal disruption in the planets they're orbiting. Aquilars being primarily an ocean planet, it was utterly devastated by the storm divers. Satisfied the world was well and truly pummeled into irrelevance, and having secured a supply of the deluge spice, Zodo the Hutt retreated, and Republic forces were ultimately able to recapture the planet. Legend has it that John Devad, fighter ace and leader of Grace Command's Devil Squadron of snub fighters, sabotaged the deluge spice supplies to keep them out of the hands of both Zodo the Hutt and his own commanders in Grace Command. Zodo went on to attack Darknell with his storm divers, but he got completely wrecked, captured, and killed by the Sith Lord Daemon. By this point, both Odion and Daemon's forces were getting exhausted, and Odion started seeking out a Sith artifact called the Helm of Eldis, which was located on the barren desert world of Scarpos, where Odion was fighting with another successor to the Chagras hegemony, the Menagerie, a Sith faction led by the technology-hating Sith Lord Malachite. Odion hoped to use the helm as an amplifier for the dark side of the Force to drive everyone in the entire galaxy homicidally insane, causing everyone to kill everyone else so that at long last Odion would be the only living thing in the galaxy, and he would never have to sense anyone else's thoughts ever again. Daemon invaded the planet to try and keep the helm from Odion, but too late. Odion used its powers to drive the entire planet into a homicidal frenzy, destroying all three armies. Odion used the children in his cloisters, a fucked up Sith child-rearing scheme that this video is already too long to get into, as fuel for the helm, to drive the entire sector mad, causing sudden homicidal rampages in a 1,000 light-year radius, and the remaining Sith forces in the sector came down and wiped him out with whatever forces they had, which were able to resist the corruption of the helm. Fortunately, Odion had just barely finished killing the vast majority of his own forces in the Scarpos frenzy, but even so, killing Odion might not have been possible without defections from within his own forces, and a Jedi infiltrator. That Jedi infiltrator was Cara Hult, and the Odionate wasn't the only Sith domain she brought down in Grumani sector. If there's one Knight Errant in this sector, it's her. The diarchy was ruled by young twin children of Sith Lord Chagras. Their regent, the Kravaki Kalician, convinced these two twins to split off as the Chagras hegemony was disintegrating, and shipped in several thousand Selegians, whose unique physiology allowed the twins to use them as relays in a vast telepathic network that they could use to dominate the entire population of their capital planet of Bylura through the dark side of the Force. Using this supernaturally unitary state, the twins and their regent began amassing a fleet to invade the Daemonate. When Kara Holt checked in and discovered what was happening, she wound up in a duel with the twins and managed to kidnap Quillan, the boy of the pair. Removing one of the central nodes of the telepathic network like this caused the whole thing to collapse, and the so-called diarchy of the twins fell away. Their older sister, Sith Lord Arcadia, took advantage of the chaos to annex the planet. Arcadia brought the Jedi Kara Holt to her capital, the underground city of Kalimandretta on the ice world of Syned, and tried to convince Kara to help her defeat the other Sith in the sector. Kara ultimately refused, and the ensuing lightsaber duel was inconclusive due to an artillery barrage from Kara's mercenary allies dividing the two duelists from one another, but you can draw your own conclusions about which way that fight had been going from the fact that Kara's allies decided that lobbing artillery into a melee would be an improvement. And these are just the big stories. Heptuine was one of the launch pads for Republic exploration and colonization of this region of space in the early Republic era. Nothing super exciting ever happened there, but it's one of the oldest colonized planets in the sector and has a very large population. San Rafsix is the sector capital and was devastated when the Kandorian plague hit the sector during the Dark Age, doubly so since they were constantly fought over by the Sith Lords, none of whom ever really got full control of the planet. There were orbital fortresses overhead continuously, but between the plague and the many-sided nature of the conflict, the Jedi were never able to ascertain who was winning down on the surface. The Children of Mani were a religious sect who colonized the planet Kamasto and wound up in a civil war during the Republic Dark Age despite their inhospitable planet getting them passed over by the greater conflict between the Sith. Another religious war was fought on Sarasia. This one did not get passed over by the Sith, and they put an end to it by enslaving both sides. One of the Daemonade planets was Neelash III, where Daemon had commissioned statues of himself plated in cortosis so that lightsabers couldn't be used to decapitate them. And when Kara Holt visited and liberated the slaves there, she made a point of getting a heavy mining laser into the main plaza so she could drill through the necks of all the cortosis-plated statues and decapitate them anyway. The Samhari are an alleged near-human species native to the forest planet Samhar. As always, I'm skeptical of alleged species who are undescribed or described as looking nearly identical to another species. Makes me think that probably a planetary demonym got mistaken for a species name. Tergamenion was a dark world, a major foundry world of the Daemonade, and a potential target for the Grace campaign, but their limited forces never got close to being able to crack it. There's a reason why the Grace campaign resorted to underhanded tactics like flooding the sector with deluge spice. Windor is an inhospitable, sulfuric planet where Daemon and Odion fought a lot of their early battles, always inconclusively. Sectors are meant to be the domain of a specific culture, but sometimes there's places like Grumani Sector, where there's tons and tons of really good planets for colonizing, and no native species, except allegedly the Samhari, but I'm pretty sure those guys are actually humans from a specific planet. Certainly the overwhelming majority of the population in Grumani are human, Twi'lek, and Celestin, and Grumani is a colonial sector, a sector stamped down with a standard democratic government that works like the Republic in miniature, with its own little Senate and its own little Chancellor. The kind of government that gets set up by default because there are no pre-existing traditions here. And it just so happens that there's like 9 major worlds here, which is normally great, but it did make the place a hell of a prize for the Sith during the Dark Age. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Hook Nebula, namesake of the 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. The Hook Nebula isn't a nebula in this sector, it is the sector. I had to look this up because I knew nebulas were big, but I didn't know they were so big that they actually show up on galactic scale maps, but yeah, they can often be several hundred light years across. Hook Nebula is one of the biggest nebulas in the galaxy, but given it's one of the biggest, it's about as big as you'd expect. Hook Nebula is the domain of the Kieg species, insect people whose home land system was discovered to have valuable ore in the Old Republic era during the New Sith Wars, but before the Dark Age at the end when the Republic completely disintegrated. You might expect this would go horribly wrong, but the valuable ores were all in the marginally habitable worlds of Lan Falav, Lan Tundi, and Lesser Galam. The Kieg homeworld of Lan Barel didn't have a ton of mineral resources, that's probably why it took them so long to find them, so the Kieg set up some cantinas there to give the miners someplace nice to spend weekends and got their cut of the mining operations that way, and life on Lan Barel was pretty much unaffected. No giant pit mines or industrial runoff or any of the other usual consequences of a miner species having valuable ore discovered in their home system. Lan Burrell got passed over by the New Sith Wars, the Clone Wars, and the Galactic Civil War, but the Hook Nebula as a whole wasn't as lucky. The Rebels dug in here after the Battle of Yavin during the Mid-Rim Retreat. The Empire sent the K-Met fleet and their Scimitar Assault Wing to recapture the Hook Nebula. As was the general trend in the Mid-Rim Retreat, the Imperials were victorious, although the Rebels did inflict some pretty severe casualties on them early on in the campaign. The victory is mostly credited to Scimitar Assault Wing, a TIE wing who adapted their tactics to counter the Rebel atmospheric defenses that had threatened to crush the Imperial assault in the Aturi cluster. The Rebels never found an answer to Scimitar's vertical swoop technique and lost their strongholds on Udre and Newland 6. None of these were super important worlds, just locations of major Rebel strongholds which had intentionally been dug into uninhabited or under-inhabited planets where no one would notice. Also, there's a rumor of a particularly successful arms dealer during the Galactic Civil War in Hook Nebula named Perengal Kreen, who is said to be a third-generation Twi'lek. A third-generation Twi'lek? What the hell does that mean? Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Juris sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. Juris sector is the domain of the Pastorian insect species. Do you think these guys might be related to the Geonosians somehow? We're not that far from Geonosis, and honestly, if you told me that a few generations of good diet made Geonosians significantly taller, I wouldn't find it that far-fetched. Whatever their genetic lineage, the Pastorian king tried to brown-nose his way into the First Order's good graces to secure their assistance against some kind of political rival, and there's no word yet on how that turned out. Reports from the Outer Rim come in kind of slow sometimes. While Juris sector may have been incorporated into the Republic as the domain of the Pastorians, it is pragmatically speaking capitaled at K-Met, the planet host to the K-Met fleet that attacked the rebels in the nearby Hook Nebula, and the star system where Darth Vader hung out waiting for his probe droids to report back on the rebels' location. Not a whole lot really happened there. It was the oversector capital for 15th Hook Nebula, but almost nothing happened in this oversector during the war. Admittedly, I'm not sure why Grumani's sector was passed over for the capital. That thing's full of major worlds. There's a rumor that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Aayla Secura fought Asajj Ventress and the Black Sun on a planet called Trigalis in this sector. It's not impossible, but it's nowhere near 12th Cerulean Spear Command, where Aayla Secura spent most of her time in the Clone Wars. There's also a rumor that a human cultist group called Knights of the Core and an eco-terrorist group called the Army of Life smuggled an invasive species onto a planet called Stend 4. It was a grand colony, so I get why the Knights of the Core would want this, but I don't know what the Army of Life's motivation is supposed to be here. I kind of expected a sector this important to have more of a story to it, but, well, here we are. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Carthax sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. Carthax sector is home to Locke, a barren desert world and pirate stronghold ruled by Nim. Nim was a consistent enemy of the Trade Federation in the late Republic era, constantly needling and harassing their operations throughout the region. He was also rebel-friendly in his old age during the Imperial era, which means he's often viewed as a Robin Hood sort of figure, a hero pirate. The same system is home to Muramire, homeworld of the Mire species. Carthax sector is the domain of the Mire species, but they're mostly only known for getting invaded just before the Battle of Geonosis by the Trade Federation deploying a Techno-Union army of battle droids, so the CIS wasn't declared yet, but it was the CIS. They were still trying to skirt under the radar while building up forces, which is why they had relatively light forces in the sector, so light that Nim was able to wreck them with a pirate fleet. But also, Nim had a hell of a pirate fleet. He's no relation to Zim the Despot despite the rhyming name, but his life's accomplishments kind of rhyme with Zim's just like his name does, so I'm calling this a win for nominative determinism. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Kuimin sector in the 15th Hook Nebula Command of the Outer Rim. Breshkal is a desolate world, but was home to the hidden fortress of the Twi'lek arms dealer Perengal Kreen, the one said to be a third-generation Twi'lek, whatever that means. Kedar's pro-imperial King Gordon so thoroughly lost control of his planet to Crime Lord Horch that the Empire sent a legion of stormtroopers to subjugate the planet directly. And Kurkris was the base of operations for the Etirmin Bativ pirates. That's a hard one to pronounce. They got shattered by the Empire, though. 15th Hook Nebula had their hands full taking on pirates in the Kuimin sector, but they had a pretty good track record of winning. The Empire's track record is really unimpressive when you compare how often they got wrecked by the undergunned Rebel Alliance, but considering the Imperial track record against rando pirates, that's mostly a testament to how well organized and committed the Rebels were. Not to mention how well supplied. It sounds weird to think of the Rebels as being well supplied, but while they were badly outgunned by the Imperials, they still had capital ships and tank battalions, which pirates generally did not. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Kiblini Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. This sector is the domain of the pint-sized fish-like Nilapi species, which you might recognize from Oko 9 Bar from the Golden Age of pod racing. They are adorable, but the sector is better known for Socorro, homeworld of Lando Calrissian. Socorro was colonized by Corellians in the middle of the Old Republic era, and records claim that 4 of the intended 6 colony ships arrived, but I kind of wonder if actually 2 of the 6 found the planet they were looking for, and the others wound up on Socorro by mistake, because Socorro sucks. It's a volcanic desert planet with no central government, sliced up between nomadic desert tribes outside a handful of major cities, which are run by crime lords. This is not a planet that screams to me of a successful initial colony. Kiblini Sector is also home to the Black Balir, a fleet of pirates and smugglers who demand strict adherence to a code of honor. Their namesake were the Black Balir of planet Ered, a non-sentient feline species that faced extinction because of deforestation efforts on the planet, and which the group adopted as a mascot. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Lull Sector, yes really, in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the Outer Rim. We wouldn't be in 15th Hook Nebula if there weren't some crimes lying around, but Lull Sector is pretty tame by the standards of the trailing sectors. Planet Kendamar has a major casino of the Ten-Loss Syndicate, but you can tell how small and unimportant that planet is from the fact that a couple of fancy casinos are its most significant feature, and Planet Magilop is home to the Lucent Syndicate, an illegal holoporn studio, and I am once again stressing that if someone gives me 20,000 credits, I am perfectly willing to fly out to the Outer Rim and confirm these shocking allegations for myself. Lull Sector is allegedly home to the Sumerian species from the planet Lull. The rumor is that they have a caste system with significantly different anatomy between castes, so the Sumerians have a base 8 counting system because their Thought caste has 4 fingers on each hand for 8 total, but other castes have other amounts. This isn't a far-fetched description of a species. They have specific anatomy described, rather than being an orphaned name that could be a planetary demonym misunderstood as a species name, like how people thought Chalactans were a species, but no, they're just people from Chalacta. Most of them are human. The Sumerians have a specific anatomy described, and that anatomy doesn't sound like someone saw another species and got some of the details wrong, like the huge number of 4-armed species that are probably just basilisks or zexto. Records about them are few and unconfirmed, but they describe the kind of boring fragment of anatomical and cultural descriptions that you would expect to slip through the cracks of the Imperial bureaucracy's purge, rather than being an alleged one-off encounter with Han Solo or Lando Calrissian. All that said, it's sufficiently underdescribed that I'm not sure if these guys really exist. A similarly likely but unconfirmed species are the Aphitekins of planet Dom Braden. They're a sentient, autonomous form of plant life with a pretty thoroughly described anatomy that doesn't match any other species. I could even see both of these species being real, since either or both of them could have easily been mistaken by explorers as non-sentient. Sentient plant life is extremely rare, so if the Aphitekins didn't make a point of demonstrating intelligence to an explorer, they might have been missed. And not all Sumerian castes are sentient, so an explorer might have popped down to what looked like a city, tried to speak to a few locals, found clear signs they were all non-sentient, and chalked up the structures to something like termite mounds, artificial structures created by non-sentient creatures. There's a third supposed sentient species in Lull Sector, the water worms of the ocean world of Drexel. This one has a proper spacer tail attached. According to legend, at some point in the late Republic era, the Jedi exiled a band of pirates to the surface of Drexel, where they created a floating city ship and ruled the surface of the sea. Decades later, second and third generation exiles revolted against the corrupt leadership of the pirate captain's son, Governor Quarg, and the rebels were driven into the sea. Before they drowned, they discovered the water worms were sentient and had an advanced society despite a relative lack of technology due to a lack of any opposable thumbs or, indeed, any limbs at all. The rebels formed an alliance with the water worms and fought a war for control of Drexel against the corrupt city ship of Governor Quarg. The war raged for years before Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo showed up to push the rebels over the top. This has all the hallmarks of being a spacer tale, but it's not as far-fetched as some of them. This was soon after the Battle of Yavin, when the rebels would have been looking for a new place to site their base, and they did spend a lot of time in the trailing sectors looking for one. A lot of the details of the water worms and the pirate ship/city might be exaggerated or fabricated, and the direct involvement of rebel celebrities like Luke and Leia might be pure fantasy, but the basic shape of the story makes plenty of sense with the timeline of confirmed galactic events, so it's not as far-fetched as it sounds at first. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Marel sector and 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. Marel sector is home to the planet Ragnar 8, namesake of the Ragnar Syndicate, a chapter of the Bounty Hunters Guild. You'd think that would lead to at least one cool spacer tale, but nope. Why is this its own sector? Make it part of Skyne or LOL. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about Parmel sector, located in 15th Hook Nebula Command of the Outer Rim. It wouldn't be the trailing sectors without at least a little bit of organized crime, which today is brought to us by the planet Callistas, a mining world where they dig up nuclear reactive material and pirates like to hide out in the mine shafts left behind. You can't be executed by the authorities if you've already died of cancer. Parmel sector is a pretty bog-standard Republic sector that's mostly notable for how much it sticks out in this desolate stretch of the galaxy for reaching the level of unexceptional. The most notable planet here is Revkin 5, which is famous for its megalopolises, but don't be confused. If you look at a list of city designations, then Megalopolis is right below Ecumenopolis, and that can trick people into thinking that a planet with multiple megalopolises is well on its way to becoming an Ecumenopolis, but the gap between Megalopolis and Ecumenopolis is vast. The exact definition of megalopolis varies, but the easy one is any continuous urban area with at least 10 million people. My home planet has a population of about 8 billion, a surface area that is about 3% covered in urban areas, and a total of 45 different cities with a population of 10 million or more. We are bigger than average even amongst major worlds, but not by a lot. When records say Revkin 5 is known for having lots of megalopolises, it might be that they're a pretty standard major world with a population of 5 or 6 billion, which means they have a few dozen megalopolises, and for this region of space, that's a ton. I haven't gone into it because exhaustive lists of planetary population figures are 1, boring, and 2, frequently unavailable anyway, but a lot of the sector capitals in the trailing sectors have a population of just a few hundred million people. That's closer to the population of Tatooine than it is to the population of Naboo. So when records say that the Imperials had trouble chasing down rebel cells in the many megalopolises of Revkin 5, in context, that might just mean that Revkin 5 was one of the only planets in this entire oversector to have more than one megalopolis on it. That mission of chasing down the rebels was given to a mercenary company called Churhees Riflemen, who had their headquarters on Turkan 3, a minor planet also located in Parmel sector. Churhees Riflemen would later end up nearly wiped out by the rebels after being promised artillery support from the Imperial Army, and then abandoned. When Churhees Riflemen reconstituted themselves, they started taking contracts from the rebels, partly because it was the Mid-Rim Offensive and the rebels had more resources to throw around than they had before, but also because Churhees Riflemen wanted revenge for being told they were to hold the line until Imperial artillery support and reinforcements arrived, when actually they were being sacrificed as a stalling action while Imperial forces retreated. Churhees Riflemen would later engage Imperial Army units on Gosho 4, and while they got the worst of it early on, they were able to rally after improvising man-sized tractor beam traps to catch incoming grenades and hurl them away. They couldn't reliably return them to sender, but they could reliably toss them away from Churhees' position, which was good enough, and pretty good considering it was wonky experimental tech that usually didn't work for its intended purpose, let alone the jank that Churhees Riflemen wound up using it for. The Imperials generally lost a lot of battles out here, although Turak 4 was spun as a victory because of how much damage was inflicted on the rebels in the process of losing the planet. It's hard to know how much of that is Imperial cope and how much of it is recognition that the Empire could win a war of attrition with the Rebels, as long as they could keep the Rebels from mobilizing too many planets. The Rebel theory of victory in the Midrim Offensive was that most of the galactic population was on their side, but the Imperial theory of victory is that most of those would-be rebels were armed with blaster pistols, or, in many cases, naught but a defiant spark in the eyes, both of which would prove to be no match for AT-ATs during the Midrim retreat. The Rebels had more troops to spare in theory, but the Imperials had more on the actual battlefield, which is why the Imperials counted Turak 4 as a success, because the Rebels did lose a lot of people while taking the planet. On the other hand, the Rebels did capture Turak 4, and it was because the Imperials sent a bunch of tanks into the volcanic Hetak Mountains, where Rebel ambush units with Plex missile launchers ripped them apart. Imperial repulsor lift tanks are generally pretty agile and good at dealing with Plex missiles, but firstly, this wasn't the 2M Saber fighter tank or one of its predecessors, this was the much clumsier 1H repulsor tank, a clown shoes knockoff that you don't hear very much of because they failed in practically every battle they were used in. And second, the mountainous terrain made strafing impossible even if they had been using proper fighter tanks. The Legion deployed to Turak 4 was commanded by Colonel Zell Johans, and the losses taken there prevented them from participating in the attack on Hoth several years later. Colonel Johans complained that if his 1H repulsor tanks had been prioritized over Colonel Veer's AT-ATs, his reconstituted unit could have taken Echo Base faster and cut off the rebel retreat. I broadly think the Midrim Offensive was defeated by the speed and firepower of the 2M Saber tank, not the looming silhouette of the AT-AT and its fear-based combat doctrine, but if I'm an Imperial commander on Hoth, I would much rather have the best walker than the worst tank. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Parmik Sector and 15th Hook Nebula Command in the trailing sector of the Outer Rim. The closest thing to a major world that Parmik Sector's got is Shaunar, a paradise planet that's near enough to Torch Nebula that it dominates the sky at night. It's very pretty. Parmik Sector is also home to Laramus, a minor and inhospitable world that is very mildly famous only because it's the namesake and original base of the Laramus Base Irregulars, a rebel unit that got bounced out of the army between Endor and Jakku. After Endor, the Empire was coming apart at the seams, and the Rebel Alliance wanted to be ready to slide seamlessly into being the New Republic as soon as they captured Coruscant, which meant letting some of their more insane troopers go. The Irregulars took up mercenary work, and in the one remaining year of the Galactic Civil War, they lost 50% of their number to casualties and another 45% to deserters. The remaining 5% became Outer Rim mercs, but their numbers were so thoroughly reduced that no one really kept track of them. Particularly for an oversector like 15th Hook Nebula, where most sectors had at least one pirate base with hundreds or thousands of violent criminals, one platoon of guys crammed into a freighter doesn't really merit keeping track of. Who knows where those guys wound up? Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Portmoak Sector of 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. This sector sucks. Briding Anchorage used to be a lush world covered in beaches, but it was reduced to a slum when a con artist named Quarlo Bryden took over in the New Republic era and renamed the planet. Hyrule Preen Beta was one of those minor planets like Ferrix or Trask, one with a population measured in the tens of thousands, where the starport and the planet share a name because it's the only town on the whole planet. I say was because the Imperials wiped out the entire planet for suspected rebel sympathies. Not like Zero Base Delta, they just sent a Stormtrooper Legion in to burn down the one town on the planet and kill everyone they saw on the way, and that was sufficient. Rus 8 was an agro world, but it got industrialized in the Imperial era and is now covered in smog and acid rain. It's so bad you have to wear breath masks anytime you're not in a thoroughly ventilated building, because the smog will cause lung damage after a few months of exposure. The planet is run by a local crime lord called Torel Vorn. You might notice that I had to drill down to minor planets like Hyrule Preen Beta just to get anything out of this sector at all, and yeah, this place is pretty desolate, and what is here is bad. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Quent Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command in the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? In the asteroids of the El Chandru system, which is also home to the planet El Chandru Pica, whose climate is said to be good for the health and hosts lots of health resorts and things like that. Also in Tresidis, a planet run by Hergla crime lords who make most of their money from casinos. And there's some on Shiunzras, a planet where a swoop gang called the Blood Sniffers extorted the local farmers and torched any villagers who didn't or wouldn't pay up. The sector also has a couple of spacer tales. Godo is allegedly a planet with a yellow-skinned native humanoid species whose priceless religious statues were stolen by Jabba the Hutt, which supposedly caused a disease outbreak on the planet, and Han Solo retrieved the statue from the dead Jabba's palace to save the planet at some point between Endor and Jakku. As with most of these spacer tales, it's not individually impossible, but the frequency with which Luke, Han, and Leia encounter strange one-off adventures during the Galactic Civil War is pretty incoherent if you believe every spacer tale you hear. Shogun is supposedly a crystalline planet that can cause dreamscapes, the term used for visions and revelations locally. Supposedly, the Mandalorians conquered this planet in the early Republic era. That's not impossible, but the Mandalorians would have to have decided to go on an epic odyssey across the full length of the galaxy in an era when hyperdrive sucked, instead of conquering any of the many, many planets closer to their existing space. Supposedly, Shogun is the planet on which Mandalore the Ultimate opened up the Mandalorian creed to species other than the Tongs native to Mandalore. I say native, it's complicated and probably fake, but I'll talk more about that when we get to Mandalorian space in 10th Crimson Dagger. Probably the most significant world in Quen Sector is Susevfi, a moon in the Suarbi system. An Anzadi Jedi Knight named Nikos Tyrus founded the Gensare on Susevfi during the Late Republic era, an order that hoped to learn both the light and dark sides of the Force at the same time. The Jedi found the Gensare and destroyed their temple on Susevfi during the Clone Wars. Surviving Gensare tried to join the Empire after Order 66, thinking they had a common enemy in the Jedi, but Vader and Palpatine were not interested in potential rivals and killed every Gensare they could find. There's rumors that Luke Skywalker found the surviving Gensare and integrated them into his new Jedi Order, so presumably they all got killed by Kylo Ren. These guys either have cockroach-like survivability, or they're just a myth, and the reason they keep popping up after being supposedly wiped out is just because people keep making up new stories about how they got wiped out, and then later on someone comes together and tries to stitch them all together. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Ursaic Sector and 15th Hook Nebula Command of the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. 15th Hook Nebula is pretty desolate, but there's so many alleged species in Ursaic Sector that you'd think we were back in the slice. The Chortos are half-sized little furry guys. There's a couple of species that crop up a lot. You know, your smooth-skinned monkey types like humans, Twyla, Togruta, Weequay, Nikto. Your feline types like Cathar and Togorians. And I'm starting to wonder if there's a short and furry species category too. Habitiforms. We have verified reports of these guys, but not much in the way of verified history or rumors, which is why I had time to speculate about a habitiform genus. There's no less than 4 rumored species out here. The Nalrithians are absolutely jacked bugs, plausible but unconfirmed. The Slugarians are slug people who eat garbage, and that sure sounds like a joke rather than a real species. The Icarii are supposedly a gray-skinned, near-human species wiped out by the Empire using bioweapons because, although they get injured just like anyone else, actually killing them is nearly impossible. Like, you can blast their torso concave and they will eventually get better. The rumors don't say why the Empire wanted to wipe the Icarii out, but the Empire doesn't always need a reason. The Ursaikarl are wholly undescribed, which means, as usual, I suspect this may be a planetary demonym that was misunderstood as a species name. The Ursaic Sector is the domain of the Ursaikarl people, whether that's a species or just a bunch of human colonists, so for once, the sector name actually makes sense. During the High Republic era, the Ursaikarl manufactured an antidote to the Bordal contagion, a disease that messed up the lungs. The disease had already been cured by the Republic, but the Fujari pirates kept intercepting shipments, stripping the ships for parts, and then letting the cure spoil, presumably because they weren't able to find a way to safely fence a good that had such a recent market. Due to the Rusan Reformation, the Republic didn't have a centralized fleet to provide escorts, and unlike other sectors in more populated regions like the Slice, the sector governments of the trailing sectors were all pretty weak. So many sector capitals out here have only a few 100 million people. That's not the kind of tax base that supports a large standing sector fleet, and you can't just build a war fleet overnight, even if you are very suddenly willing to pay much more for it. but you can hire a fleet overnight, while their sake solve the immediate problem by manufacturing the cure themselves and distributing that on-planet under the protection of orbital defenses, which, while not especially impressive, were enough to scare off pirates. After the crisis, they decided they needed the Fujari pirates cleaned up immediately before something like this happened again. And they turned to the Trade Federation to do it. The Trade Federation didn't have a full-scale droid army yet. That took until the Star Combine Hyperspace War 100 years later. But they sure did have tons of extremely heavily armed transport ships. These things were massive, so they could haul lots of cargo, and they were absolutely bristling with turbo lasers and point defense cannons so that they wouldn't have any blind spots for taking out pirate frigates and snub fighters. They were also really, really slow, which made them mediocre in the Clone Wars, good for transporting humongous armies, but terrible for fighting Star Destroyers. But against pirates? These things were massive overkill. The trade feds already sent fleets in and out all the time shipping Nova crystals from the mining planet Cotelier, so they accepted a mountain of credits that detour a dozen Lucre Hulks out to the Fujari and wipe him out. Cleaned up the Hajara gang of pirates while they were at it. I get a very Hijoian vibe from these guys, but that's speculative. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Samic sector and 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. It's 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? The Sabrixin system has no less than 3 inhabited planets, Sabrix, Elokas, and Helisk, and the dominant power there is a criminal gang called the Sabrin Ring, which came to power after the Battle of Endor. Not because the Empire had disintegrated or anything, this sector was always the middle of nowhere, it just happened to have occurred at around that time. The Sabrin Ring went from credit laundering and extortion to basically enslaving the system for the mass production of fraudulent credits and later other illegal goods. But those are pretty minor worlds on the fringe of the sector, which is already on the fringe of the galaxy. This sector is the domain of the supposed Nedigi species of the planet Nedij. They're avians and not very heavily described, so I can only guess they're humanoid from the fact that they are described as about 1.5 meters tall, rather than having a 1.5 meter wingspan. Hard to say if these guys are real, but they lack any of the telltale signs of spacer tails. They aren't an orphaned demonym, and the entire record of their existence is not a brief appearance in a story about someone famous like Han Solo or Lando Calrissian, and they aren't from any of the standard genres of spacer tales like caveman aliens, fetish history, or Outer Rim angels. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Sandbra Sector and the 15th Hook Nebula Command of the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. The Sandbra sector is the domain of the ocean world of Aqualaris, no doubt that one, a planet entirely covered in ocean and whose colonial civilization is built underwater. There is no native species here, and the planet wasn't colonized by an aquatic species like Mon Cala or Gungans. It was colonized by air breathers who decided they weren't going to let the ocean scare them off of some good real estate. As far as I know, they would never start harvesting the ichor of drug addicts using creepy little girls who were watched over by drill-headed zombie monsters. But we can dream. They're mostly famous for their pod racing circuit because it's got lots of transparent paneling in the underwater tunnels, which makes for a pretty spectacular track. This sector is also home to Dakar, a resistance base, and Ragosa, a Tordarian vacation planet. None of these are at all important, but they are in stuff you might have seen. But we're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? A gang of water bandits terrorized the moisture farmers of the planet Beheboth. Luke Skywalker supposedly destroyed them. A couple dozen thugs with blasters is the kind of thing Luke Skywalker walks through without even noticing, although this was sometime around the Battle of Hoth before he'd come into his full power. Still, perfectly plausible story, even if it is suspicious that it's yet another adventure Luke Skywalker supposedly had while knocking around the galaxy. Most of these stories can be true individually, but they can't all be true together. Also, Beheboth is supposedly home to sentient clouds of gas, so I guess that's neat. On the subject of rebel celebrities having alleged tales of daring do, a rebel base on the planet Golrath was abandoned while the Rebel Alliance was doing the secret base shuffle after the Midrim retreat. The Imperials found it after it was cleaned out, but according to the stories, the crystals of the planet were naturally recorded everything around them, like a holoprojector, and you could extract the recording if you knew how to read the lattices. The rebels only learned this after they'd left and the Imperials were investigating, so Leia Organa led a strike team to blow away the whole base and any crystal recordings they may have left behind. Just like the Luke stories, sounds plausible, could be no proof. Another unconfirmed story of Rebel celebrities: supposedly Luke Skywalker was sent to the planet Serfiti, allegedly inhabited by the lizard Serps. The Serps had developed high technology, but had forsaken it to live simpler lives, so Luke Skywalker had to navigate some Byzantine contest called Doom Jousting to secure the Serps' aid against the Galactic Empire, and also stop them from eating one of the other Rebel pilots. I find it unlikely that a species homeworld would revert to mostly Iron Age tech like this, but as a colony world it sounds plausible. Maybe some anti-tech Trandoshans got together and colonized this planet. Everyone here was on board with abandoning technology because they came here to be among people on board with that plan. There's shades of the caveman alien story here, but it's more plausible than most, because these guys supposedly chose to give up technology rather than somehow going undiscovered despite being in space that was fully mapped out by the late Republic era. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Skyne sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? The planets Lucren and Woodenstam are home to various criminal operations of the locally significant Tenlos crime syndicate. Credit laundering, clearing houses for stolen goods, that kind of thing. And that is all that ever happened in this sector. It was only explored in the High Republic era. I guess that wasn't enough time for anything more interesting than some laundromats prone to rush hour traffic at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Sujimis sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? On planet Karazak, home of the Karazak Slavers Cooperative. A co-op! Slavers who don't believe in hierarchy. Irony is dead. They're serious about the cooperative thing, though. Most of their employees are second or third generation slavers, and the cooperative invests a lot of resources in making sure they don't pay for their crimes. Their standard is that no Karazak slaver ever spends more than 30 hours in prison. They call themselves the Zygaria of the trailing sectors, and they don't have nearly the reach Zygaria does, but Zygaria's reach doesn't extend all the way down into the trailing sectors, so the Karazaks are indeed the biggest slaving operation in this region of space. The planet Ab-Bishing is allegedly the site of a war between two native species, the Farang and the Warut. There's not a whole lot of details, though, and it sounds mostly like a garbled, misunderstood retelling of the verified tale of Ordo Plutonia and its moon Pantora. Pantora is the capital of the Sujimis sector, and the ice planet it orbited was thought to be uninhabited for millennia. During the Clone Wars, it was discovered the planet was home to a primitive species called the Tals. The Pantorans had never really cared about Ordo Plutonia, and the Tals hid out in ice canyons without any major heat signatures. They're mammals with regular body heat, but they don't have cities or other obvious signs of civilization, so they weren't obvious from space, and Ordo Plutonia is a shitty planet that no one ever looked closely at until the Grand Army of the Republic established a listening post there to serve as an early warning system against the Separatists. The Separatists sent an advanced unit to knock off the listening post before it could get fully operational, and then the Tals wiped both of them out. The Pantorans had legal authority over the planet, which certain firebrands decided meant they were allowed to kill as many sentients as they wanted, as long as they weren't Republic citizens, which, I mean, legally that's technically true. It was one of the ways the Republic pressured systems into joining despite their lack of a military, but the idea is that people would join the Republic for protection, not that Republic member states were allowed to commit genocide as long as they did it really fast, before the victims were able to apply for membership. Despite the aggressive action of certain boots on the ground, the Pantoran Assembly ultimately decided they didn't want to see how our genocide was technically legal was going to play in the Galactic Senate, and they recalled all officials from the planet, leaving it to the Tals. Soon after the Battle of Yavin, Darth Vader crashed on the planet Vrogos Voss, amidst the ruins of an ancient pre-Republic civilization. Carbon pursued Vader there to try and finish him off. Carbon was a Mon Calamari cyborg. The Mon Cala were Republic loyalists from the start of the Clone Wars, despite being totally surrounded by Separatist space, so the Empire and their high human culture had a certain level of tolerance for them, while they were still pretending to be successors to the ideals of the Republic. After the Death Star, Carbon must have known the completely mask-off Empire wasn't gonna keep him around long, because he made a pretty aggressive move trying to flat-out murder Darth Vader like that. It didn't work. Alzok 3 is the home world of the Tals. I have no idea how these hunter-gatherers got from one star system to another. My first guess was that Alzok 3 and Ordo Plutonia were different names for the same star system, but no. There's lots of sources placing them firmly in completely different star systems. They're not very far away, so if the Tals had hyperdrives, this wouldn't be weird at all, but they don't, so I don't know. The Empire set up major mining operations on the planet and enslaved the Tals like the Imperials do. The Pantorans weren't going to stop them, and the Imperials retreated from the planet without a fight after Endor and before Jakku, when 15th Hook Nebula tried to consolidate their forces around K-Met. This kind of timidness is one of the reasons the 15th Hook Nebula completely disintegrated after Jakku. The Tals joined the New Republic and now run the mines for themselves, keeping the profits of their labors. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about the Svivreni sector of 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? The Renikii were destroyed by 15th Hook Nebula in the Ki-Lamar system. No record of what the Renikii did before then, so maybe the Imperials just flat out murdered some civilians and made up a pirate fleet to cover it up. Renikii does kind of sound like a species name or planetary demonym. But also, maybe the Imperials took out some actual pirates and all the records of their crimes were lost in the purge of the bureaucracy. There are a lot of pirates out in this part of space. A crime lord named Buva is also rumored to have a secret asteroid hideout in the Vesar asteroids of the Talanga system. I've talked shit about sectors always having stupid names, but I find that here in the trailing sectors they are much more likely to be named after their capital planet or something else sensible. The trailing sectors are also much more recently incorporated into the Republic than the core or the slice, so I think what might be going on here is that the sector names tend to outlive the status quo that justified them. Mitaranor might have been more important in the ancient mists of the early Republic era and only got superseded in importance by Kashyyyk and Dosha later, after they had integrated into galactic society in the Old Republic era. That's a wild guess because our historical record is a disaster, but it fits the evidence we have. As you might imagine from that intro, the planet Svivren is actually important. Not so important that we have any verified records of it, but according to what we do have, it has a population of about 8 billion humans, Celestians, and Ewoks? That can't be right, which makes me suspect that 8 billion figure might be wrong too. That's on the large side even for a major world, even in regular sectors, let alone the trailing sectors where most of the sector capitals have under a billion. All that being said, allegedly 15th Hook Nebula invaded this planet sometime after the Battle of Jakku and were repelled. 15th Hook Nebula disintegrated into independent systems because they were unable to put down rebellions throughout the Oversector Command, but I haven't found a whole lot of details about which sectors rebelled. This region is full of tales of this one time Luke Skywalker or Leia Organa fought some Imperials, but never as part of a major uprising and never after the Battle of Jakku. Maybe this is what did it. Svivren, one of the bigger planets in the region by population, declared independence after Jakku. 15th Hook Nebula tried to invade them, they were fought off, and at that point, rebellion spread across the whole Oversector. I still don't buy the Ewok thing, though. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Tamaran Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula, so where are the pirates? The Fujari pirates' base was in the tertiary Fujar system in Tamaran Sector, but the story of their demise mostly takes place in Ursaic Sector, so go find that video for details. Tamaran Sector is home to two species homeworlds, the Ketoak of Kyrdos III and the Riorians of Rior. No idea which of these two, if either, are the species who's supposed to rule this sector. They're both definitely real, but the only celebrities I could find for them is the Ketonak musician Druby McCool of the Max Rebo Band, and the Riorian Stalnis, who is, a wanted murderer. Riorians are generally pretty peaceful, it's just bum luck that the only one in the entire galaxy to get famous for anything was famous for killing a guy. Planet Savarkos II is a major spice mining world with huge chunks of the crust made up of the unique spices Andris and Carcinum. The planet is inhabited by a lot of nomadic tribes, each ruled by a so-called Spice Lord. There's natural caverns carved by spice eels that make great mine heads, provided the spice eels don't come back and eat you, and the mining operations are so extensive that there's small but noticeable amounts of spice in the atmosphere at all times. If you don't wear a breath mask, you will be high all the time. One of these two spices is also highly flammable, although records don't say which, so both blasters and slug throwers are a terrible idea liable to cause local firestorms. All cooking has to be done in heavily ventilated buildings, and melee weapons are favored, along with special Savari flash pistols, which are like blasters except they suck. Perfectly regular humans can shrug off multiple flash pistol injuries before being incapacitated, and they're finicky things prone to malfunction. Tamaran Sector is also home to the most hilariously stupid spacer tale I've heard yet. Planet Zetrop is allegedly a planet where Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie went to vacation on while Leia was recovering from having been kidnapped by Emperor Palpatine's three-eyed son Trioculus, only to discover the planet was a secret stronghold of the Prophets of the Dark Side, an ancient Sith organization that abandoned the rule of two during the High Republic era under the leadership of Darth Millennial. I'm not making any of this up, but it is definitely made up. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Taraba Sector in the 15th Hook Nebula Command of the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. We're in 15th Hook Nebula Command, so where are the pirates? Well, planet Vrant Tarnum in the Stigmarn system was part of wild space during the High Republic era, and that's where the Elders of the Path fled after their cult collapsed. The Elders of the Path believed that any use of the Force was wrong, and had stolen the Rod of Seasons, which, despite the friendly-sounding name, was used to control the Nameless, monsters who hunted Force sensitives. After the original cult disintegrated, the Elders of the Path decided the Rod was too dangerous and broke it in half, hiding one fragment of it on Vrant Tarnum, a planet once home to some ancient pre-Republic civilization that had long since collapsed and left only ruins behind. So far as uninhabited planets go, this one is a pretty conspicuous place to hide your Jedi-killing treasure. Regardless of why the Elders chose to hide it here in particular, a century later the Nihil Marauders arrived, led by Marchian Ro, seeking the Rod, and soon thereafter the Jedi arrived, seeking Marchian Ro. By this point, Ro had already gotten the first half of the Rod of Seasons, so when Yoda and his friend showed up on Vrant Tarnum, it was for all the marbles. And Marchian Ro and the Nihil got those marbles. The Jedi kicked the Nihil off the planet, but only after Ro had already retrieved the second half of the Rod from the abandoned ruins on the planet. With his new weapon, Ro set his sights on the nearby Jedi Temple on planet Takodana in the Tashtor sector, which is not in 15th Hook Nebula over sector, so that is a story for a very other time. Taraba Sector is one of the most recent sectors to be fully explored. In the High Republic era, it was wild space, meaning space that bordered on explored space closely enough that it wasn't really unknown, but people still hadn't checked every star system for inhabitable or inhabited planets. And when they did, just a few decades before the Clone Wars, they found Utapau. Taraba Sector is, if we're being diplomatic, the domain of the Powans and Utai, the two native species of the planet Utapau. Utapau is a steadfastly neutral planet, first discovered in the Late Republic era, and which had no major involvement in any war except the Clone Wars, when General Grievous muscled his way in and got chased out by the Grand Army of the Republic a few days later. At the time of the Galactic Civil War, Utapau's first contact with Greater Galactic Society was still within living memory, if only barely, so they didn't really have any loyalty to either side. The Empire officially incorporated them as a sector during the closing stages of the Clone Wars, but they mostly just said, yeah, you got it, boss, we're a sector, and then went back to doing what they were doing anyway. The Empire was never very interested in giving them proper representation, just in assigning them a Moff, and after the Battle of Jakku, Utapau became an independent system mostly because it had already kind of been doing its own thing for the entire Imperial era. So they were just making it official. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Thuris Sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command, the trailing sector of the Outer Rim. This sector presumably has some actually inhabited planets in it. Planet Ifron has at least one cafe on it, so that's something. The only notable one I could find, though, is the uninhabitable Red Desert Moon in the Sixella system. Its name isn't officially recorded, but if I understand the layout of the system correctly, that would be Sixella 3A. A disgraced Imperial commander made his last stand here, scraping together what resources and hostages he could to make a booby-trapped funhouse of doom for a rebel force that allegedly included Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. The planet is uninhabitable because of a lack of water. It does have air. That's it, though. That's the only thing that happened in this sector. Not every sector has a story, and sometimes when it does have a story, it's like one of those shorter young adult novel kinds of stories. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Toblain sector in 15th Hook Nebula Command. According to legend, the Jedi Jor Kai came to the planet Altacar IV after Order 66. A Force-sensitive Twi'lek slave named Shalia received visions from Jor Kai, guiding her to escape with fellow slave Gort, a Trandoshan. Shalia didn't learn much before stormtroopers tracked the rogue Jedi down, and Jor Kai was killed, covering the escape of his new apprentice and her friend, and the two went on to join the Rebel Alliance. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Torch Nebula in 15th Hook Nebula Command and the trailing sectors of the Outer Rim. You wouldn't think there would be a whole lot of star systems inside nebulas. Nebulas are big enough for it, don't get me wrong, but they're also floating space dust that eventually gets sucked together to form a star. If there's already stars inside of it, then surely those stars will suck the space dust in and clean up the nebula. Maybe that does happen, but it just takes forever? I am not a spaceologist, but Torch Nebula is not a sector with a nebula in it. It is a sector-sized nebula, and nebulas of that size do happen. The Spice Runners of Kijimi, who I must assume are associated with the Ashiga clan somehow since their capital is on Kijimi, robbed a planet supposedly called Guata. I say supposedly because even though this story is very well sourced overall, there's no word on which sector this planet is in, just that it's not in Torch Nebula, which makes me wonder what else we don't know about it. Anyway, they robbed a warlord on Guata and fled into the Torch Nebula. At the time, Poe Dameron worked with the Spice Runners of Kijimi, having fallen in with them for about a year after a falling out with his father. His father, Kes Dameron, was trying to track Poe down with the help of the Osako pirates, so the pirates ambushed the Spice Runners in Torch Nebula and ran them aground on planet Judakan. Despite the bad terms of their departure, Poe was glad to see Kes on the planet. Kes asked Poe to leave the Spice Runners. The other Spice Runners did not like that. The standoff was interrupted by an ambush of lurkers, allegedly native to the Torch Nebula, although that's unconfirmed. Those monsters are all over the galaxy and have been about as far back as records go, but apparently some science types think Torch Nebula might be their origin because something DNA. There were definitely lurkers on Judakan, and both parties retreated to their respective ships and escaped. Poe left the Spice Runners soon afterwards. Word is that right before engaging Starkiller Base, Poe Dameron sent a transmission of his flight logs to Yavin 4, where Kes Dameron lives, so that if he died that day, his father would be able to piece together where he'd been and what he died for.